Matthew, it's good to have you back on the programme. Thanks for your time tonight. So this guy is a farm worker. He kills people on a farm, probably places he knew. The government on Saturday night killed people in a dance hall where he met his ex-wife. 11 people killed there, most of them over 60. It's random. They are everyday, mundane locations, which tells us that no one is safe.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the story about the 6-year-old bringing the gun to school and shooting his teacher, right? So these aren't the stereotypical gun violence incidents. And it's true, with 400 million guns in the United States, we need to do a better job of making sure, for example, Christian, we can't solve everything. You and I have talked about this before, and we've been very realistic about it. You can't solve everything. There are ways to reduce gun violence, but a lot of them we're not doing right now. But there are ways to reduce gun violence. But yes, these do not fit the typical picture of where we see gun violence.
There are just too many guns, as we've discussed before. 400 million privately owned firearms. No other nation has more civilian guns than people. That's 120 guns for every 100 Americans. And there are more mass shootings than there are days in the year. So that tells us it's an epidemic. And I suppose the question around the world would be, why does America not treat it like an epidemic, as a public health crisis?
So, Christian, you're correct, obviously, that there are more mass shootings than there are days in the year. It's absolutely correct. So folks know there are about 45,000 deaths a year by gun. 25,000 or so of those are suicides. And there are many people in the United States, like myself, who work on this issue all the time. There are ways to do things. There are ways to reduce gun violence. This is going to, I don't want this to sound self-promotional at all, Christian, but we've been working with Tufts University, which is a university in the United States, very prestigious, Dr. Michael Siegel, on ways to reduce gun violence. We have put out that roadmap. Some of that, Christian, is people who commit violent crimes, misdemeanors, are still allowed to get a gun in most of the United States. If you do something like that, stop people from being able to get a gun who've committed a violent act, that will help reduce gun violence. If you have red flag laws, that will help reduce gun violence. State background checks, that helps. Nothing, Christian, in other words, nothing takes you to zero, right? So 45,000 deaths a year, we need to have less deaths from gun violence. You said it. There are more guns than there are people in the United States. That's not going to change. So what do we do about it? How do we reduce it? We do think there are ways of bringing people together to do that. I'm not the only one. We're not, 97% is not the only one trying to do this. You mentioned it's an epidemic, but there are a lot of good people working on it. We haven't worked fast enough.
I looked at the figures, Matthew, from I think 2014 to 2019, and around that period there were around 400 mass shootings a year, and then from 2019 through 2021 it suddenly spikes. It goes up over 600, and obviously that coincides with the pandemic era. Why do you think it's grown so significantly?
It's such a good question. It's such a good question. It does seem like people get angry and they feel a way of communicating is sometimes using a gun, right? I mean, that's what you're seeing in these cases. A person is mad at his colleagues, he goes with a gun. A person's mad at his ex-wife, he takes a gun. It's all male, right? You never hear about any women doing this, all men. So why is there, as you said, an epidemic of people doing this? But also, Christian, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are 25,000 suicides with a gun on an annual basis. Now, that's something else that we need to look at very carefully. And while these mass shootings are terrible, I want us to also be able to cover the fact that there are deaths on a daily basis. You said there are more mass shootings than days in the year. You know, I think all of us need to be talking about this on a daily basis, not just when the most horrific acts occur.
Can I bring Stephanie in on this? Because Stephanie, you know, we talk about mass shootings, but of course we don't focus on the everyday gun violence that we see in cities like Chicago or Baltimore or wherever it may be. What do you think works? Because clearly, as Matthew said, there's a lot of really good people putting a lot of effort into this, and there are some things that make a difference.
Yeah, it's just that the problem is that those who are elected to create public policies are not moving in the way that they should. You mentioned, Christian, that this is an epidemic. Well, when you have an epidemic, you solve it with medicine. You solve it with outreach. You solve it with a solution. And unfortunately, we're continuing to see that there is no nationwide real movement when it comes to gun reform in this country. Thankfully, we have states that have taken some action. California is one of those states where, no, we're not going to get down to zero lives lost from gun violence, but it can make a difference to have background checks, to have the red flag laws. Those make a difference. And unfortunately, we're just not at a place where our elected officials are moving policy in a way.
Is that because of the money because of the money that comes from the gun manufacturers, Matthew? No, or is it?
I don't agree with that. No, I think we get into this a lot on a lot of issues, not just guns, where if people disagree with us, we think it's because they're getting paid off. There's more money on the gun reform side than there is from the NRA. Every town makes a lot of contributions to candidates, for example. What we have to win the argument. There are a lot of people who agree that the Second Amendment, you can have whatever gun you want. There are a lot of people who feel that way. We have to win that argument. Most gun owners feel that we should have background checks. Most feel that we should have red flag laws. We have to do a better job, if you believe that, in electing the people that reflect those views. It's not because there's a lot of money on both sides. In other words, Christian, if a candidate who did not favor gun reform said that they would, don't you think that they'd be getting a ton of money from every town immediately for their next campaign? Of course they would. It's not the money. We have to win that argument.
So, Stephanie, it is more complex than that. Does it come? I mean, Governor Newsom says tonight, the California governor, the Second Amendment is becoming a suicide pact. Is there something in that some, people, particularly on the right, are so attached to their constitutional right and the right to carry a weapon that you're never going to get the reform that you want because you won't get elected if you go down that route?
Yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, guns is as American as apple pie. I mean, it is a part of the fabric of this society where people want to cling to their guns and also don't want to have, restrictions made in a way that they think is going to, restrict their personal usage. Even though we're seeing, when it comes to automatic weapons, I mean, how that isn't a clear case of something that needs to be banned, I don't know. We're seeing people who can be killed literally within seconds, a mass amount of people. And so, until we have this cultural shakeup, I agree with what he was saying. We are going to continue to see this spiral out of control. For this to be the highest number of deaths that we had at this point in time and any other, point in modern history is shameful, and we need to take action.
David's sitting. It's a very American issue, David, and I am always slightly nervous or careful not to sound pious from a British perspective looking inwards, because as Stephanie says, it's the Second Amendment, gun rights, apple pie, and we don't fully understand it, but it's horrific to watch from the outside.
It is, and it is just so different to the situation in the UK. And I take your point, Christian, about not wanting to sound pious. I mean, I think it's a mystifying debate from this side of the Atlantic as to why steps haven't been taken to control guns. In anything like the way it happens pretty well everywhere else. The idea that there aren't background checks, that people of really quite young age can acquire all the elements of this. Some of the weapons which are readily available. It is extraordinary, and you just wonder what it would take for things to change in the US, and that's what it looks like from here.
Well, certainly more than thoughts and prayers.
That, Christian. Can I answer that?
Come back on that. Yeah,
the gentleman. What it takes is the way that the Congress is set up is that if you have as many votes in Arkansas as you do in California, for example, in the Senate, right? So you have an equal say. So it makes it you need 60 votes to get something done in the Senate out of 100. And that makes it very difficult to get anything major done. So if you want to get something done, you have to elect those people who reflect those values. That is possible. It's difficult, but it's possible.
Yeah. It's a really important point, that. Matthew, always great to get your thoughts. Thank you for coming on again this evening. Come back soon. Thank you. Right, it is time